I'd say our next speaker is one of the best friends that we have in the media, but he's much more than that. He was the voice of one of America's most popular talk shows, a best-selling author, a philanthropist who has raised millions of dollars for a wide range of charities. He's a devoted husband, father, and he's a true American patriot. He always works to help ensure the election of candidates who share his dedication to liberty. In today's political world of flip-flops, deceptions, and lies, we count on his voice to help identify those who truly believe in freedom. He's one of our most well-known members, and he's a steadfast defender of American values. Please join me in welcoming Mikhail Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you. It is great to be back at NRA convention and to be able to visit and see old friends and make new friends. And to be here, you know, on the occasion truly of the 100th birthday of my father, Ronald Reagan, just makes it really special. My father taught me at a very young age. Somebody just asked me in the back, what was it about your brother and you? What was the difference? I said, my father took me hunting. You know, we're celebrating liberty, we're celebrating rights and what have you here at this convention. And I really think about my father because those so round out who he was. A man of liberty, a man who believed in fighting for your rights. And he did it from a very young age, whether he was the head of the union in Hollywood, the Screen Actors Guild fighting communism that was filtrating into Hollywood, or whether it was governor of the state of California, or there was president of the United States of America. I have a book out called The New Reagan Revolution. Came out a couple of months ago. And I wrote it because I think people need to really understand who my father truly, truly was and where he came from and where he lived. He never forgot where he lived or where he came from. My father, if you really think about Ronald Reagan, he was someone who spoke to you in parables, where we have too many politicians today speaking to us in sound bites. Ronald Reagan spoke in parables because Ronald Reagan was God-centered in his life. And it was with that God-centering he was able to give us the presidency that he gave us for 8 years during the 1980s. My father believed in freedom. He believed in rights. And I wrote the book based on his 1976 speech he gave in Kansas City when he lost. It's easy to quote someone when they win, but what do they say when they lose? Because the speech he gave in Kansas City back in 1976 really launched what happened in the 1980s. He didn't know he was going to speak that night. He was up in the booth. All of us had left and gone back to the hotel, knowing that the president would never ask Ronald Reagan to be the last speaker at a convention. We were having a glass of wine, my wife Colleen, my sister Maureen and I, and lo and behold, Gerald Ford asked my father to come down and speak to the convention. My father was walking down and he said to Nancy, I don't know what to say. And Nancy said, well, you'll think of something. And boy, did he think of something. And what did he speak about that night? He spoke about bold colors, but he also told us another story. And what the story was, he had been asked to write a letter that would be put into a time capsule that would be opened on the 300th birthday of the United States of America. And he said, what a daunting task to write a letter to a people who would know everything about us, but we would know nothing of them. And he thought, what do I write about? And as he was driving up the coast of California, as he said, the ocean on his left, San Ynez Mountains on his right, he said, "Do I write about the freedoms we enjoy today in America, knowing if we don't make the right decision now, those who live on the 300th anniversary of the United States may very well not enjoy the freedoms that we have today." That's why I wrote the book, because I see every day our freedoms being taken away more and more by our government, and how I wish we had Ronald Reagan back to bring them back. I want those who live on the 300th birthday of the United States of America to be able to open that time capsule and read what Ronald Reagan said to them back in 1976. Your freedoms are being eroded, and we need to fight every day to keep them. Newt Gingrich asked me not too long ago, "Why is it, Michael, that I can win an election, or your father can, or Margaret Thatcher can? And it seems that even though we win, we end up losing." And I said, it's because we conservatives look at an election as an endpoint. Liberals see it as a beginning. We elect someone, and then we go home. We go to our jobs. We have jobs. Liberals, their job is to act like termites, to tear away at the foundations of America each and every day. And if we're not engaged each and every day to tent those termites, we end up losing the day. America is worth fighting for. When we lost my father on June 5th, 2004, we lost more than my father, Ronald Reagan. Nancy lost more than her husband. We lost more than a former president of the United States. America lost her cheerleader, and he was America's cheerleader. He didn't go overseas and point a finger at the United States and blame us. He uplifted us. And we need to be uplifted again by our leaders. I think about my father as we look at the world today that we live in. And I think about what I see in Libya, and I remember the story I shared before with you about my father and how my wife Colleen and I were having dinner with him one evening at the Century Plaza Hotel in Beverly Hills. And a call came in from Ed Meese. And Ed said, "Mr. President, you know we're doing war games in the Gulf of Sidra. And Muammar Gaddafi is sending planes out to lock on to our boys, and there's a great worry that in fact they may shoot at one of our boys. What should we do if they're shot at?" My father said, "Shoot back." Ed then said, "Mr. President, what happens if indeed they shoot and they turn and they run?" And my father said to Ed, "Ed, if they shoot our boys and turn and run, you chase them all the way back to their hangars if necessary, but you shoot them down." He then was asked by Ed Meese, "Do I need to wake you, Mr. President?" My father said, "Only if our boys are shot down." The next morning, 2 MiGs were in the ground. My father had a good night's sleep because it was their boys that were shot down, not ours. And Ronald Reagan, I might add, before he went to bed, did not pick up the phone and call the United Nations to see if it was all right to be the President of the United States. Ronald Reagan always seemed to do the right thing because he was always thinking about us, the American citizens, not himself. There were others that would be around my father who would try to build a legacy for Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan wasn't interested in building a legacy. He was interested in doing the right thing. In 1976, when he did lose, as a son, standing with his father in a room, I had to ask my father, what is it that you miss most about not winning the nomination tonight? And he said, Michael, I have watched American presidents for too long sit down with secretary generals of the Soviet Union. And every time we sit down with them, it seems they always ask the American president to give up something to get along with them. He said, I wanted to become president of the United States so I could be the one sitting in the chair. I would let them choose the room and the chairs and the place because that's how they do those things. And as they were telling me, the American president, what it was I was going to have to give up to get along with them, I wanted to get up from the chair, walk around the other side of it, lean over and whisper in his ear, "Niet." I want to be the first president to say no to a Secretary General of the Soviet Union. Ten years later, in Reykjavik, Iceland, called there by Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev said he would only sign on to the agreement put forward if Ronald Reagan gave up SDI or Star Wars. Ronald Reagan got his chance, and he said "niet" and turned and walked away. And when he turned and walked away, the media said it was a loss for Reagan. Ended up being a win for freedom, because it wasn't long after that the Berlin Wall fell and freedom came to a people who had been put behind an iron curtain. SDI and Star Wars. See, Ronald Reagan believed in our right to carry a weapon, to be able to have a gun. He understood the Second Amendment, but he also understood that other countries should have the right to defend themselves against evil. That's why he came up with SDI and Star Wars. And to think this president, Barack Obama, one of the first things he did was take away SDI and Star Wars from the Czech Republic and from Poland, and took away their right to be able to defend themselves against those who would like to come into their countries and take over their freedoms. Barack Obama made that determination. When I was over in Poland in November of 2009, interesting enough, I was talking to the then president of Poland, who unfortunately died with his wife and staff in that terrible plane crash a few months later. And the president of Poland said to me, "Why did your president take away our right to defend ourselves?" I said, "I have no answer to that." He said, "Then who is running your foreign policy?" I said to him, "I think George Soros." He said, "That's what we think." So it's not just here, it's worldwide. When Ronald Reagan stood before the Brandenburg Gate in 1987 and called for that gate to come down, everybody but Ronald Reagan and Peter Robinson wanted him to take out of his speech telling Gorbachev to tear down the wall. There was a memo written on June 2nd of 1987. It was to Colin Powell, and it said this from the National Security Council. We read the speech. "At best, it is mediocre. It is certainly a missed opportunity. Please see attached for changes." The changes took that whole part about asking Gorbachev to come to the gate, open the gate, tear down the wall, was all X'd out and initialed by the National Security Council. But Ronald Reagan knew the right thing to do was to say, tear down this wall, and let the people who were in bondage know that there was a president who stood with them, who in fact stood for freedom. They knew it. And they had a president who changed the policy of the United States with 4 words about the Cold War, when Ronald Reagan said simply this: "We win, they lose." And we won. My father also had one of the great senses of humor. He was able to laugh at himself. And you laughed with him on many occasions. This year, of course, is the 30th anniversary of my father being shot, March 30th, 1981, coming close to death. And I remember those days, and I remember especially the day after, when I would visit with my father at the hospital room. And as I walked into the hospital room, and he had this great sense of humor asking doctors if they were Republicans, telling Nancy I should have ducked. And as I walked in, his son, he looked at me and he said, "Well, if you're ever going to get shot, don't be wearing a new suit." And I said to him, I said, "What?" He said, "Well, if you're ever going to get shot, don't be wearing a new suit." And I said, "Why are you telling me this?" "Well, yesterday, you know, I was shot." I said, "Yes, Dad, we know you were shot." "Well, I was wearing a new suit." He said, "You think they let me take that off?" But no, the last time I saw it, it was in shreds in the corner of the hospital room. That's why I tell you, don't be wearing a new suit. And I said, "Well, Dad, thank you for that. I appreciate the information." Then he said, "Well, that young man who shot me, Hinckley." "Yes." "Well, I understand his parents are in the oil business." "Yes, they are." "Oh, I understand they live in Denver." "Yes." "Do you think they have any money?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Oil business, Denver, I would hope so." "Well, do you think they'd ever buy me a new suit?" The humor of Ronald Reagan, laying there in a hospital room, almost dying the day before. He would share that humor with you. He would share that humor with his family. He would make us all laugh. He would make us all feel comfortable. He would bring freedom to the world, but Ronald Reagan did something else after he was shot. Before he did anything else more as President of the United States, he got down on his knees and he asked for forgiveness for the young man who shot him. And he asked for God's blessing. And because of that, not only was he blessed, his presidency blessed, but we are all blessed. And I'm proud to tell you, I have a father who can't just only recite the Lord's Prayer. I had a father who actually lived the Lord's Prayer. And what a man he was. Ronald Reagan so loved this country, and so often I run into people who come up to me and say to me, "Michael, we loved your father." And I think about that and think to myself, I am so glad Jimmy Carter wasn't my father. You know, adoption's not a bad thing. Ronald Reagan doesn't adopt. Ron's here. But they brought me into their family, and I know that you loved my father. But let me tell you something. There's a reason that, in fact, you loved him. Because the reality of it is this: he so loved you. He never stopped loving America and loving the people in America. And he never stopped wanting to fight for all of our rights. And one of those great rights is the one we're here for. The Second Amendment to the Constitution, the right to bear arms, should never be taken away. And you're here to make sure it won't be. You need to be engaged each and every day. You need to, when you leave here, when this convention's over, don't go home and write on your calendar where you were on this date in 2011. You need to get engaged, because the forces of the left, the forces of evil, the forces that want to take your right away are working as we speak to take your rights and my rights away. And if we don't leave here and stay engaged with what we've learned and how we feel, then we're going to lose those rights. Please don't go home and remember this convention. Go home and still work as if you were at the convention. Because I want, and I'm sure you want, those that open up that little tiny program in the 300th anniversary of our country, that capsule, I'm sure you want them to be able to open it. I'm sure you want them to have the right to open it. And they will only have the right to open up the capsule, to read what my father has put into it, if we fight every day, 24 hours a day, to make sure that those who live on the 300th birthday of this country have more rights than we have today in America. And this organization, the NRA, can certainly do it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, as you know, I'm also here for other reasons that I'm honored to do. Because tonight, in the year that marks the 100th anniversary of the birth of my father, I have the honor of presenting the National Rifle Association's Ronald Reagan Leadership Award to the charter member of the NRA's Golden Ring of Freedom, Joe Gregory. The award is a letter my father wrote in 1990, completely in his own hand, to a friend regarding the fall of the Berlin Wall. In the letter, my father recites a philosophy that guided him his entire life, and I quote, "There is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit." Joe Gregory embodies this same philosophy. Joe's conviction in protecting our God-given liberty is so strong that he has led the fight to strengthen the National Rifle Association and its mission to defend our Second Amendment rights. There can be no doubt his tireless commitment to freedom has helped make America more like the shining city upon a hill that my father envisioned. Just ask Joe, and he'll tell you. My involvement with the NRA is based on my desire to leave a better world for our children and for others. Today, we still have to make sure that the flag waves over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Freedom is not free, and the NRA stands to defend freedom. That's why I support it. It's not surprising Joe Gregory cherishes the freedoms unique to this country because he spent a lifetime of hard work creating an American dream of his own and helping many others realize their dreams along the way. First, Joe helped build General Injectables and Vaccines into one of the largest medicine distribution businesses in the entire United States. And after that, and with the help of his brothers, John and Jeff, Joe founded King Pharmaceuticals in 1993. With Joe serving as vice chairman, King became the fastest pharmaceutical company in the history of Wall Street to go from IPO to S&P 500, with over $1.6 billion in sales upon his retirement in 2002. But Joe Gregory isn't done working. He is currently president and CEO of Gregory Management Company, a private investment firm, and he also serves as chairman and CEO of a privately held security software company. Friends, today we need President Reagan, my father's vision, to guide us more than ever before. My father knew that free Americans could rise to any challenge if only government got out of the way. He knew that if great men like Joe Gregory were given free rein to build an innovative, and net result would be more job creation, more prosperity for all, and yes, more charitable giving to organizations of all shapes and sizes, including those like the National Rifle Association, which stands to protect the freedom of all Americans. I'd like to bring out, if I could, Wayne LaPierre. Wayne, if you'd come out, please. And also, would you bring out Ron Schmeitz? Need some help presenting this award? Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in congratulating the recipient of this year's Ronald Reagan Leadership Award, Joe Gregory.